So it's almost like we should turn this crisis into an opportunity, and sociology helps us with that. It's really nice to be here with you. Allison asked me to share why sociology and why now. And so why do we need sociology at this particular time in history? And why is it so important, especially in the sort of strange times we're living? And so I wanted to share with you my thoughts on this, and some ideas as to, again, why is sociology important? And the short answer would be that sociology becomes really a vital discipline when society undergoes a very profound transformation. And pandemics are moments in history that have really profoundly changed society. And so why do we need sociology to some extent also to understand what's happening and to understand how pandemics change the world and who's been left behind and what can we do and what type of sort of solution can we think about to make things better? So if we wanted to go back a little bit in history, we could think, for instance, about a book by Daniel Defoe, who spoke about the Black Death in London in 1665. And the way in which he describes society is really fascinating, because there are many things he said that we can probably relate to. And so when Defoe spoke about the pandemic in London in the mid-17th century, one thing he said is that there was an eerie silence everywhere. Probably the same silence we got used to when we when the shops closed, the pubs closed, and people began staying more at home than they normally do. And then he said that there was a sense of fear throughout society because all of a sudden people were afraid of being next to each other. And also the strange thing about pandemics is that people feel like they're not in control. There's a lot of uncertainty. And in those years, it felt as though it was almost like God's punishment on society. And to some extent, we can relate to this also today, because anytime there's something as big as a pandemic, anytime a pandemic hits, chaos follows. And if we think about our world today, this is happening in many ways. And so since the pandemic began, since the lockdown began, we changed our habits. We would normally meet sort of on campus, but we're meeting online. This is a very simple example. And then the labor market changed. So many shops has to close. People found themselves sometimes in economic difficulties, and the environment changed. Some cities all of a sudden had a better air quality, and in a sense the whole world seemed to be different pretty much overnight. And we felt this in our daily lives. And if we think about the past few weeks and the past few months, there have been moments when social fear sort of became manifest. And as sociologists, we do look at the data for fear, for instance, or for panic, for instance. And one of the ways in which we do see that societies are afraid is, for instance, if we look at what happened at supermarkets and in our grocery stores in Lancaster, in London, in the United States, throughout Europe, throughout India, all of a sudden there were empty shelves and long lines, as if people were afraid that there might be shortages of food, as if the possibility that all factories and plants would close left people dealing with the uncertainty that they may not be able to purchase all of that they needed. And so supermarkets were very much sort of a symbol of panic in those very first few weeks. And at the same time, there were also other differences that happened overnight. And it's again that most shops closed. And so all of those non-essential activities were shut down overnight. And some may not even open again. And there was a sense not just of vulnerability as far as the health crisis was concerned, but also a sense of economic vulnerability. To give you just a very simple example, in the United States, over the past 3 months, 45 million people filed for unemployment. It's pretty much 1/6 of the entire population. This wasn't as strong in the UK, but almost 3 million people filed for unemployment. It means that people who are on vulnerable contracts sometimes find themselves without a job and without an income. And this happens tremendously, very quickly, very rapidly, almost overnight. And if we look at the sort of what happened in the labor market throughout the world, we can also think about India. And here, labor protection is so fragile that in this case, millions of workers suddenly found themselves without a job and without a source of income. And we do remember that because we did see those pictures with actually tens of thousands of people that tried to walk home because buses had been suspended and trains had been suspended. And we've seen this diaspora of people sort of walking home for hundreds of miles without food and without a place to sleep. And so when we say that pandemics create shock and chaos in the world, there's many indicators that sociology can use to actually make us better understand why that is. And homelessness, for example, this image went viral because in the United States, many homeless people were left to sleep on a parking lot, for example, in boxed off areas. But we don't just need sociology. We need sociology for different reasons then. We need sociology to understand the different impact that sort of these crises have in the population, but also how they have a different impact on different groups. And so we know, for instance, that in the UK, Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities had a disproportionate impact, both in terms of death rate and infection, but also in terms of unemployment. And the same happened in the United States with Black Americans. And so if we take all of these different data, we can see how many transformations happened just overnight over the past few months. And these take us from the beginning of the pandemic to the Black Lives Matter movement that we've seen throughout Europe and across the United States. And we can also begin to see again the different sort of uses of sociology. We can use sociology to survey the different groups and how they've suffered the consequences of the pandemic. But we can also use sociology to envision a different type of society. And this is a beautiful quote by Arundhati Roy, and she's an Indian novelist and a writer. And she said on the Financial Times, she said, it's true that pandemics create a lot of suffering, but they also but they can also be considered as a getaway between one world and the next. They can help us imagine the world anew. And this is what we want to do in our department and in the MA in sociology, because we want to use sociology to help us rethink the world, to help us rethink our society and make them more democratic, to make sure that economic justice or racial justice is something that can be achievable. It gives us the tools and different modules and different instruments to think about a different world in terms of climate sustainability, and also a different way to think about solidarity and care. How can it be achievable? How can it become achievable? This is what we want to discuss in our MA in sociology, and this is just a short overview that I wanted to give you, just to give you some basic information about the things that we like to do.
I wonder if you wanted to come in and share some of your thoughts on that, in terms of what else we can learn from history, as well as thinking about those issues of visibility and what we're seeing because of the pandemic that we might not otherwise.
Yeah, I think this is an excellent question, actually, because pandemics have been defined almost like an X-ray on society, because you do get to see the social values that we live by very clearly. And so, for instance, the image of homelessness, or even the unequal distribution of uncertainty and vulnerability, they show us the inequality of our societies more clearly than we usually see it, because obviously vulnerability to death, for instance, becomes very unequally distributed. And when we see problems very clearly, it's when actually we can take the opportunity to analyze them, we can take the opportunity to develop data, we can take the opportunity to think about policies and solutions. And so I think this is a very good time to study sociology, not only because, as Joe and Jacob actually rightly said, it's an excellent time to study and to plan your personal future. It's also a very good time to think about how we can change society for the better. So it's almost like we should turn this crisis into an opportunity, and sociology helps us with that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I wonder, Francesca, if I might just put you on the spot, because I don't know very much about your research, but I know that some of your research is around sort of finance and the political economy. And, I'd be just really interested to hear you say a little bit about the kind of possibilities for rethinking that you see in relation to some of that work that you've been doing.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm loving at this time in history really is that we are seeing the notion of value. We're seeing how we value people, or how we value solidarity. I was very impressed, for instance, by the Black Lives Matter movement, because the very name of it tells us something about human value and tells us something about how we should rethink social inequality, or the value that we give to our history, to our colonial history. So value, as Babs Katz, who's in our department, has taught us, also speaks about social values and human values, and there's and we come from histories that have sort of dehumanized part of our societies according to created racial or sexual hierarchies. And therefore, these are the things, again, that I'm interested in, and these are the moments in history where I think this sort of heritage that we have can be reconsidered and rethought.